We've covered what the best legendary lords are in combat. But what about those things that CA love oh so very much? What about the best legendary heroes for battle? So, who hits the hardest, has the best spells, and makes the best cups of tea? Let's get to the list and find out. And just like last time, we're going with these heroes maxed out with abilities and items, but not stat buffs from campaigns, since that tends to get a little bit wacky with obscenely high numbers in the endgame. Coming in 10th place, we have Goric, starting our list of a literal monster in the realm of heroes. Goric hit the game alongside Throt the Unclean, and has been terrorizing those unfortunate enough to come across him for a while now. And he's pretty damn terrifying to behold. Respectable stats across the board with mid armor, excellent attack, and a huge armor piercing weapon damage with a cheeky little bonus versus infantry and a charge bonus. This guy hits combat like a freight train and not much can slow him down, with massive damage with his area attacks cleaving units down with every single swing he takes. His abilities only add to the fun with damage buffs, and his ever entertaining evisceration power drill maneuver alongside spell resistance for nearby allied units and some frenzy. He really does hit combat incredibly hard, and those first few moments in combat he can put in crazy amounts of work. Now, he's by no means perfect, hence why he's all the way down here in 10th place. As I said, his armor is only mid and his defense is pretty low for such an elite unit. All it takes is a few enemies with decent armor piercing damage and he'll start to feel the burn before long. Add on to this his fairly large hitbox, and ranged units quickly become a problem too, as it's fairly easy to focus down the giant mutant from a safe distance and whittle him down in no time flat, especially if we're talking armor piercing missiles. Don't get me wrong, if it's him versus ranged units, he has the speed to run them down, but if he gets focused early and pinned down, he can be in serious trouble. Add on the fact this melee fighting is literally all he can do, and he's not getting any higher than this. Coming in 9th place, we have Killgore Slaymame. Aside from having the name that every metal frontman wishes they had, this guy honestly flies under the radar a lot of the time, especially since good old Harry the Hammer hit the scene. But mild spoilers for the list, Harry isn't on it because I think this guy is the cooler him. Now right out the gate, Hazza has higher stats, but the potential ceiling here is higher with old Killgore. Baseline, we're looking at massive armor, great leadership, excellent attack, and huge damage of the armor piercing variety with a sprinkling of bonus versus infantry. He's fairly similar to Goric, but without being a giant mutant thing. This lets him hide in melee troops away from enemy range and makes him a touch harder to take down with a slightly smaller hitbox. Don't get me wrong, he's still larger than basic infantry, but still not as large as a giant mutant rat ogre. Yeah, his attacks won't hit as many units in an area, but he'll still put in plenty of work. Now his abilities are the reason he actually made this list, and he has quite a few of them, with everything focusing on attack. All in all, he can get up to 47 more melee attack, which is literally over 100, alongside tons of damage and debuff and leadership buffs, making him borderline unbreakable and a damage powerhouse capable of taking on entire tides of enemies with ease. And don't forget, this is all heavy armor piercing and magical and flaming damage, so pretty much nothing short of ward save can stop this damage from hitting and hitting damn hard to enemy health bars. Whether it's infantry or one-on-one versus other footlords and heroes, he can do it all pretty damn well. He's getting no higher since at the end of the day, he's just a melee hero with no ranged or magic, and not much he does for the rest of the army. He's great and all, but a tad selfish to say the least. Next up we have Throny Ironbrow. Hailing from Clan Angrund, Throny is essentially an ethereal runesmith on steroids. He has the exact same lore of runic magic that all runecasters have, but alongside this, he's also a very respectable battler in melee with decent armor piercing, magical and frostbite imbued attacks. This means he can get into those front lines as well as provide spell support for his army. As long as he's not up against magical damage, he'll also be relatively tanky. If they do have magical damage, he'll go down like Malekith's mum after one margarita. But without it, 55% resistance is pretty decent. Now his actual melee stats aren't all that, but still respectable enough to earn him a place on this list. That's pretty much his entire deal. Nothing he does is particularly outstanding, but he does a number of things pretty well, and that adds up to a great hero addition to any army. Runes for damage, debuffs and augments to your own troops, passable melee performance to get value in between casts, and decent toughness against non-magical threats. Toss in his extra abilities providing extra buffs to his own units and debuffs to enemies, and his frontline's presence just gets a little bit more value. Now one-on-one, can he beat either of the two that we just went over? No chance, he'll get wiped. But as part of an army, he's incredibly valuable, and that gets him on this list. There's more to battling than hitting things really hard, and this guy is living proof of that. Or I suppose previously living proof. In 7th place we have the Blue Scribes, one of the most recent legendary heroes to hit the scene, coming from everyone's favourite DLC, Shadows of Price Changes. The Blue Scribes are pretty damn good. The spells are a whole thing that we'll come to in a moment, but even without them, they're still a pretty strong unit. Not the biggest hitbox in the game for ranged units to fire at, with a barrier, a light sprinkling of resistance and a little bit of armor to make them harder to take out than you think, when combined with their blazing speed. Their damage is also pretty decent, with decently high damage missiles, albeit not the most armor piercing. Don't be fooled by their high weapon strength however, as their pitiful melee stats and charge bonus make them almost useless in melee, especially once you remember that they're a little big with only moderate defenses. But of course the reason that they're on this list is their magic. Depending what you pick up in their skill tree, you can use spells from pretty much any lore of magic in the game, meaning they quite literally have the spells for any occasion you could happen across. It can be high damage from the lore of shadows, healing from the lore of life, or massive missile power from the lore of beasts. Honestly, if you get lucky, they're the best caster in the entire game. So it does beg the question, why are they placed so low? Well, it's just that. You need to get lucky. Every time you cast a spell, they re-roll their spell slots, so you don't know what you're going to get, and the only way to re-roll again is to cast. So you can end up in positions where you have no useful spells, and either have to wait for a moment when they're going to be useful, or waste magic to re-roll for the chance to get something better. Random chance means that some of the time they can be the most powerful casters in the game and give you exactly the spells you need time after time after time, or be pretty much useless and burn through your winds and magic on spells that you never use if given the choice. The potential is there, but random chance pulls them down pretty hard, so they'll get no higher. Coming to 6th place, we have Felix Jer. I think this one might annoy some people, since Felix and his buddy Goric have been pretty terrible since they were added to the game all those years ago. Now, they're not bad because of their abilities in combat, it's just their implementation sucks, and if you ask me, we'll just go over that. Felix here is one of the greatest heroes that Empire can get access to. So, raw battle prowess first. He's pretty damn good, with decent armor, leadership, and melee stats with great armor piercing and anti-infantry bonus damage. He's great for throwing into the front lines to wipe out some infantry and rack up a tasty number of kills in no time flat. But that's not really where his power lies, and is instead a nice bonus on top of everything else. You see, Felix is more of a supportive bard than a fighter. Check out my Baldur's Gate 3 build video to see why. And here in Total War, it's no different, and it all comes down to the abilities. Helping Hand lets him inject literal crack into an allied lord or hero, most often Goric, and make them nearly unkillable whilst also being a machine in melee. I mean, 40 melee attack is enough to max out most decent fighters, and 40% flat damage reduction is absurd even if it does only last for 22 seconds. The 2-minute cooldown is admittedly a little bit long, but he's not done yet. Blood Oath grants nearby allied lords and heroes regeneration, meaning they will constantly heal when fighting alongside Felix. Now yes, it's not loads, but it means enemies will need to kill your units several times over to finish them off compared to normal. So he can throw down in melee to keep himself alive, make allied characters insanely strong in combat, heals those up around him, keeping the most important units in his army fighting fit for just a little bit longer. If after hearing all this you still think he's terrible, then I don't know what else to tell you, because this guy is great and you cannot change my mind. Coming to the midpoint of our list, we have Goric Grim. This is one of Marcus Wolfheart's Infinity heroes that he can collect over the course of his campaign. And looking at him in a vacuum, you might wonder how exactly he made it here. Sure, he's tough with huge armor and has great damage in both melee and ranged, but he's not really all that different from a regular Master Engineer. A couple of stat changes here and there and some ability swaps, but essentially he's not all that different. The reason he makes it, however, is the potential he has when working alongside Empire units, and the fact that Master Engineers are probably some of the best heroes in the game if you ask me. So alongside that power of his own, he can buff nearby units with accuracy, reload speed, extra damage and resistance, and of course, we're talking about ranged units here. How's about extra reload speed on handgunners shooting into armoured infantry, huntsmen firing on incoming monsters, or even a Hellstorm firing into enemies' general direction? Sure, most of these effects have cooldowns, but you can seriously rocket the Empire's already strong ranged roster into the stratosphere with a couple of choice casts of this guy's abilities. Add on his frag grenade ability, and this fella can do some serious damage and enable nearby units to do even more. If you get him in your army, just plop him in the middle of your ranged troops and spam abilities. You'll rack up thousands in damage value without him even trying. In 4th place, we have Dramar Hammerfist. Yep, another Master Engineer. What can I say? I love ranged troops, and these guys allow them to be even better. Limited to the dwarves and another of the ghosts of Clan Angrund, this lad is much more like your average Master Engineer, but with a couple of key differences. The most obvious is of course the etherealness, so no armor, but loads of resistance, meaning if the enemy has no magical damage, he's pretty unkillable. If they do, oh god, he's gonna die. Still, he has great damage in melee and from a range, so if the enemy does bring magical damage, just keep him back, especially since that's where he can make use of his abilities. Yep, this is going to be fairly similar to the last entry, since he's basically him, but a little bit better. We still have a couple of the usual suspects with stat improvements, alongside a few more tasty treats like the restock ability, allowing him to refill units' ammo to keep them effective at range just a little bit longer. And while you may be wondering why that matters, since what are the chances that your troops run out of ammo and wouldn't fight, well, not high, but it's still nice to have, okay. All in all, he's pretty similar to Goric, but just a little bit better in almost every area aside from fighting magical damage. Aside from that, he's the best there is at being a shooty little fella. In 3rd place, we have Ariel. I haven't checked this for the video, but does anyone know if she's still bugged? If not, then she's one of the greatest heroes you can get in game, and a fairly fitting reward for putting in some fairly heavy work healing the Oak of Ages. Pure combat first, she's fine. Not much armor, some resistance, and pretty good melee defense make her tanky enough. Decent attack and non-armor piercing but magical damage means she's okay in melee. She's for sure not bad, and you can get her involved versus some mid-tier enemy units, but her real power for sure lies in the spells and abilities. First, her spells, because they confuse me so much. You have some heavy hitters like Dwellers Below and Soul Stealer, and then the utter dog-ass that is Tempest, and I suppose the rest are just fine. Add on her litany of passives and she pushes herself in the right direction to get onto this list. Finally, her abilities offer a little more damage, and a pretty bonkers heal she can place on any allied unit, restoring nearly 50% of the target's HP in just 14 seconds, and you start to see why she makes the list. She's another one of those that isn't really the best at anything, but is really good at a lot of things, and it just rockets her onto this list. So check the patch notes, see if they've even noticed that she's broken and fixed her yet, cleanse that Oak of Ages, and get this lady in your armies for some truly spectacular value. Speaking of the Wood Elves, in second place we have Codel, another from the Wood Elves. They may not have many legendary heroes, but they are both heavy hitters, and Codel hits the hardest of the pair. Now essentially, he's just a little bit better than an Ancient Tree Man, which is a Lord, and he's a hero. So in theory, you can have an Ancient Tree Man Lord with whichever lore you fancy, and have this guy alongside him with his odd but powerful mix of spells, whilst also being better in almost every single way. He has more attack and armor-piercing damage, making him into a monster in front lines combat. He's unbreakable and also has this selection of abilities to buff nearby allied units, deal damage to enemies, and deal more damage to more enemies because yeah, he has 2 of those. Onto the part that gets him onto this list is just how much stronger he is than a literal Lord. Lords are supposed to be the strongest units in the army, and here he is, better than the Lord that he's basically a copy of, and he's a hero. There just isn't a bad way to use him. Frontlines, he's a monster, spell support is great, and abilities are the icing on the cake. His one weakness is the massive size, but even then, he has immense armor and a splash of resistance, and let's not forget unbreakable leadership. There is only one way to get rid of this guy, and it'll take enemies a very, very long time to do it. And in first place, could it be anyone other than the immortal Toad himself? Is Lord Croak. Not only is he basically as old as time, but he still kicks a ton of ass, even though he is borderline not even alive. Basic combat out of the way first, even though it's not his strongest area because it still needs to be mentioned. He's really not bad. His armor is pretty mid and his melee stats, particularly defense, are outright poor, but he's unbreakable and deals a decent amount of magical damage with his area attacks. Sure, he's not going to outtrade against some storm vermin halberds, but he can clear some clan rats pretty well. And besides, you'll know why he made it onto this list. Of course, it has to be his unique spellbook, The Deliverance of Itza. This 3-spell lore features increasingly large weapons of mass destruction, going from, my, that's a decent explosion, to dropping near nuclear bombs onto the battlefield, and we're not even to the best part. Not only do these spells affect a huge area, not only is the damage incredible enough to wipe out entire late game units with ease, but friendly units are totally unaffected, so you can literally cast this on top of your own troops and they'll act like nothing is happening because to them, nothing is. I cannot stress enough how strong this is, since you can just drop damage where needed and you don't have to worry at all about them hitting your own troops, meaning you can just drop bombs, no problem, and look good doing it. And if this wasn't enough, he also has the Shield of the Old Ones, allowing him to drop up to 40% flat damage reduction onto all allied units in a huge area, and even with the 2-minute cooldown, unlimited uses means you can drop this where needed, fairly regularly, and keep your army in fighting shape, no problem. Croak is the greatest legendary hero in the game and absolutely deserves his place at the top of the list. If you disagree with this or any other placement, let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, and if you want to know what the best legendary lords in combat are, then check out this video here to see the top 10.